Hello, this is Chris Cooper, and a big welcome to the Business Elevation Show. We're absolutely delighted to have you back again. We've got another fantastic guest, Dr. Julian Huppert, who we're going to be talking to today. Julian has a fascinating career, and one of those people with a brilliant mind who makes me slightly nervous, being founding director of the Intellectual Forum at Jesus College in Cambridge. So we're going to have a conversation today about amplifying good through knowledge, ethics, and action. Before I introduce you to Dr. Julian, I want to say a big thank you to my guests last week, to Andrew Jenkins, who was talking about his incredible journey and his tips and recommendations on managing your mental health after a terrible car accident. Andrew ended up also becoming famous on a big TV show in the UK called The Traitors. And before that, we had David Bickfield the week before, who did a wonderful interview with me. David, I found an absolutely fascinating man. He's a former secretary for state for MI5 and MI6 and legal director. And so we got real interesting insight into the workings of MI5 and MI6 that you wouldn't normally get. He's now an author with a spy series, but it was really great conversation. So just to let you know, the Business Elevation Show, we are today's episode 609. So we've been around a while. We are, according to ChatGPT, one of the longest running business shows, podcast shows in the world. So we've been going a little while. I don't know whether that is due to the success of the show or due to my addiction to doing it, but we will see. But what I do absolutely love, and I think we have over the years, we have shifted the angle from the show to really be about telling you about stories now and introducing you to people who are doing really good, because because good matters in this world. And there's a lot of dark negativity. We're going through a real metamorphosis across the world. Can feel challenged by the behaviors of some of the leaders across the globe. But actually, what I want to say is that from all of these episodes, I meet so many good people like Julian today who are doing really good work. And what I want to do is just highlight that. I want to highlight to you that there's great work being done out there, and as business people, or as business people, intellectuals, politicians, leaders of charities, we can and small business owners, we can all in our own way contribute to a better world, and help support better change. I also want to say a quick mention to Dr. Chris Marquise, who introduced me to Julian. I interviewed him on his incredible book, The Profiteers, not too long ago. So let me tell you about Julian. So Julian went from cutting edge genomics research to the floor of the UK Parliament. He became a member for Parliament, and from advising on AI ethics to shaping the future of financial investments. He's lived a career which has really been at the intersection of science, of politics, and social good. And he's the founding director of a forum called the Intellectual Forum at Jesus College in Cambridge. And Julian convenes brilliant minds to tackle some of the most pressing, challenging issues of our age, from climate change and civil liberties to sustainable finance and better futures for all. So we're going to talk about some of this today. We're going to explore his remarkable journey. He has a very inspiring, sadly late mother who did some incredible work around creating the world that we want to live in. We're going to talk about his leadership in ethical governance, and find out a bit about the Generous Society and the Intellectual Forum that he's very involved in. So I expect a rich conversation today, maybe some ideas, some thoughts about how maybe you could contribute through your knowledge, through your ethics, through your action, to amplifying more good in the world. Let's help shift this narrative to a much more positive one. So a big welcome to my guest today, to Dr. Julian Huppert.
Well, thank you very much, Chris. It's a huge honour to be on the show, and 608 episodes is really quite an achievement so far. It sounds like you've had some absolutely amazing guests on it, so thank you very much for having me.
No, you're very welcome, and I love talking to people like you who inspire us. I'm really curious, and I learn from doing this as well as what I want to do is to just to inspire people to do things in a in a better way. So I wonder if you maybe we could start, Julian. I know we've mentioned Jesus College. So I assume you live in Cambridge. Is that correct?
I
Beautiful,
do, yes, just sort of southeast of Cambridge. Yes,
beautiful part of the world.
it is astonishingly hot today, which Cambridge not we're not used to that.
So astonishing what? Sorry.
Astonishingly hot.
Hot. Oh yeah, yeah, it is here as well. Yeah, I'm in Leicestershire today, and we've had 30-degree temperatures this week, and it's warm, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can't help thinking about climate change. I've got no doubt we'll get onto that in a moment. But I wonder if you could maybe start this conversation by, telling us a little bit about your life growing up, because it's always good to get a sense of people, where they came from, and how they became what they became. So tell us a bit about your early life and maybe some of your early influences.
Yeah, no, very happy to. And I think in some ways I want to compare and contrast my early life to my parents because I think that comparison was one of the key things. So I grew up here in Cambridge. Both my parents are academics. My mother, who well, we might talk about both of them later, is a brilliant psychologist who works on positive psychology, and as you say, sadly died last year. And my father's a theoretical geophysicist, so he works on earthquakes and volcanoes and landslides and all
Mm,
of those sorts of things. So I had a nice upbringing here in Cambridge, lots of academic influences. But my parents are actually Australian and they grew up in Australia. And my mother, in particular, was actually born in a refugee camp in Uzbekistan at the end of the Second
mm,
World War. So they were Polish Jewish. And in 39, when Poland was occupied, the half of the family that were on the German side were all killed. And the half that were on the Russian side were shipped out to slave labor camps in Siberia and the Ural Mountains. And then when they were released in, I think, 41, they went as far south as they could go, which was Uzbekistan and Samarkand. So for the first years of her life, my mother was literally a refugee. They were trying to, first in Uzbekistan, then Poland, Czech Republic, Paris, and eventually made it out to Australia at the end of 47. And so one of the big influences on me was just knowing that I had this incredibly fortunate,
mm.
stable upbringing in Cambridge, which is, it's not perfect, but it's a lot better than what my mother had. And I think people who get the benefit of such a privileged start can essentially go, to simplify, one of two ways. One is to say, great, I've got this head start, I can maximize my own return, or I've got this head start, I can help other people because I know how lucky I've been.
Yes.
And so the influence very much from, well, I mean, both my parents, meant that I ended up really caring about how to pay back that good start. So from quite an early age, I was interested in international human rights, refugee issues, the work of the United Nations. And there's this idea from John Rawls, the philosopher, that you should not think of the world as you are now, but through a veil of ignorance. If you didn't know who you were going to be, what would you want the rules to look like in our world? So if you didn't know if you're going to be male or female, you'd probably want gender equality. If you didn't know if you'd be rich or poor, you probably would want something which was more equal. Not completely, not necessarily, he's very much not a communist, for example. It's not complete, everything must be the same, but you wouldn't want to have the risk of falling through safety nets. If you didn't know if you what your sexuality would be, you'd want not to persecute people. And if you didn't know if you'd be a refugee or not, you'd want a lot of help for refugees.
You would. Wow, that's an amazing reframe. It's
So, but it really
yeah.
was how I was brought up because I knew all of those family stories of genuinely struggling to have any food, genuinely struggling to be able to do anything. And then my grandfather and his brothers set up a plastics company in Australia when they got there, and they ended up being successful business people. But it was a an effort to get there after many years of intense struggle.
Mm. What a remarkable story. I took my youngest son to Poland, to Warsaw last year to learn, meet and stay with some Polish friends and learn about all of that and what happened. It's so moving. And I took my eldest son out to Kenya a few weeks ago to help him understand and see poverty because we don't see that. But you had that in your family. You had that in your family and generations, and with your family early on. Really, really tough,
Yeah,
horrendously tough.
absolutely. And while I've never experienced that sort of poverty myself, I, I know that it's not because, I come from this very special bloodline, which,
Yes.
and I know, and there are people who sort of hopefully aren't as explicit as that, but it's not, some sort of wonderful thing about my family's great. It is sheer luck that I'm this generation, not the other generation.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating going to Poland. I've actually just recently reclaimed Polish citizenship, which sort of was a bit of a rethinking, but it feels like that is sort of, I was partly being European, but it
Mm.
does feel like actually my family was in Poland for a long time. Actually, in a bit of Poland, which is now Ukraine, but that's again a whole other story.
Yes. Yes. Wow. So how did you you end up involved in working in a lab, for example, and doing scientific work? How did you end up um, in that world and then going into politics as well and becoming a member for parliament? It feels like quite a transition.
Yeah, yes, it was. I mean, I'd been interested in these sort of international issues, and actually, when I was an early teenager, I thought about doing law, and was then influenced by a friend of mine, a bit of a mentor in Australia, Ben Kramer, who is in fact a lawyer now, to really take science more seriously. And so my original plan, I got into Cambridge. I'd spent some time in Australia in education, was to do a bit of science and then switch to law. And I just found some of the science so exciting. And I was very fortunate to have as a director of studies and in my PhD supervisor an absolutely amazing scientist called Shankar Balasubramanian, now Sir Shankar, often tipped to win a Nobel Prize. He basically transformed how we sequence human genomes. So anything you see in genomics is almost certainly using a technique that he invented together with David Klenneman. He's also just a lovely, lovely person. So I think the fact that I had a scientific career was partly my parents, partly Shankar. Um, but I was always also interested in not just knowledge and the thrill of science, but actually how could you do things for other people? And I think I spent a long time looking for different ways to express that need to help. So I would love to have been able to work for something like UNHCR, the UN High Commission for Refugees. I did apply for that and they didn't take me. And I gradually realized that doing things on the massive global scale was just really hard. And I got more and more interested in domestic politics. And I also did some other things. I became an ambulance technician with St John Ambulance, and I found that was a sort of short-term, tractable way to help.
Mm.
I think politics has more impact, but much of the time you don't succeed in the things you want to do. Whereas if you start off with somebody lying in a field with a broken arm and you end up with them in a hospital, you can be pretty sure you got it right. Whereas politics is harder. And so I grew up under Thatcher, and I knew I was on the other side of politics now. And we could have a rich conversation about Thatcher. I don't like this sort of cartoon villain that she is, but I knew I was on the left of centre economically because of how I think about what success looks like. And it was when I was at school and watched Prime Minister's Question Time, because it happened to be on television when I happened to be eating, that I realised I was a liberal. It was in the great days of the great Paddy Ashdown and various
Mm.
others. And I realized that actually, to me, it's not about left and right economically as the driving thing. It's about how we empower people to be the best those people can be. And that is a sort of really powerful, John Stuart Mill, Rawls, liberal drive. And so I got involved. I joined the party, did a lot of campaigning. And then actually, just before I started my PhD, I was elected to the county council as one of the youngest county councillors in the country, um, spent 8 years there, and so was trying to juggle scientific research and particularly some anti-cancer drug design with local politics and trying to work out how to make things better through those two routes. And then I had the chance to become an MP. And obviously, you don't really turn that down.
No, no. And I mean, what did you learn being an MP? What, what did you learn? What did you learn about MP's ability to make change?
It's a really fascinating question. So the UK is really unusual in having a very, very large number of parliamentarians. So we have about 650, and many places would have a much smaller chamber.
Mm.
And for some people, that means they don't manage to get much done. But I actually learnt a whole set of techniques to be able to make things happen as a backbencher. And it was partly helped because it was a period 2010 to 2015 when my party, the Liberal Democrats, were in coalition government. So although I wasn't a minister, you know, it was explored, but I didn't want to be for various reasons. I had a bit more access than I might have done. But actually, one of the things I learned is that if you're not doing the things which are the top headline of the day, you can actually get a lot done just by working with people, and particularly if you're prepared to be creative about how you go about it, and you're prepared to accept that sometimes you will achieve what you wanted, but you won't get your name on it.
Yes.
Um, and so I managed to get quite a lot of things done on really quite a large scale about supporting entrepreneurs, about infrastructure investment for cycling and walking, and all sorts of other things in a range of different techniques. And so it was a fascinating lesson. I think the single lesson I pull out of it for anybody who's interested in changing policies, whether you want to go into politics or in any other way, is find out what somebody is trying to achieve and work out how what you want fits with their goal. If you want a minister, a civil servant, whoever it is, to do something they're not already interested in, you're saying to a very busy person, here is more work for you. Whereas if you find out that they are desperately trying to find a way to achieve, you know, congestion reduction on roads, and you say,
Mm.
actually, if we invested in cycling and walking, we could solve some of those problems, they might go, great.
Yes.
And so work with people of whatever their political persuasions, not against them.
Yes. 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 I like that. That's great. And then so brought you to Cambridge and also to the Intellectual Forum?
So 2010 to 15, as I said, I was a member of parliament. The decision of my party, which is, for those who don't know the UK very well, we are socially very liberal, so very involved with same-sex marriage, very involved with small business, with all sorts of other things, very pro-environment. But we were in coalition government with the Conservatives, who are the main right-wing party. And that was not popular across the country, the fact that we worked with them, and it certainly wasn't popular in Cambridge. And so when the 2015 election came in, I very narrowly lost. I lost by 599 votes, not that I was counting. And so that was a difficult thing to deal with, but it meant I had to work out what to do next. And I planned to stand in the next elections, which we expected to be 2020, but I needed to find something to do for the years in between. So I still had connections with the university, and so I spent a year teaching in the politics department about public policy and how that works, and was supposed to then go back to teach physics to first year undergraduates and go back to the research I'd been doing. And then an opportunity came to set up a new centre at Jesus College. The title is the Intellectual Forum. It's not the perfect title I would have chosen, but it captures some of what we do. And to help get real public engagement with ideas, with topics, having conversations about some of the biggest things in our time, to do convening, to bring people together, to solve problems, to make a difference. It looked like a fantastic job. I applied for it. They offered me the job, and I've been running it ever since.
It sounds like a fantastic job. And so what are some of the issues that you deal with?
So there's a very, very broad set
Oh,
of things, and I've tried to keep it really broad. So there are themes that are there. So we've done a lot of things about responsible AI, for example.
Yep.
We ran the first big summit for leaders in responsible AI before it was popular. You know, if you remember a few years ago, the week when Silicon Valley Bank collapsed and GPT-4 came out,
Yep.
that's when we had that week
Right.
was our summit. So we've done a lot of things around there. Our most recent public event was looking at AI and healthcare with an amazing professor from Montreal, Catherine Regis, and John Fistine locally. Look at what a doctor's going to be for in 20, 30, 40 years when AI is just transformationally different. But as well as these themes, and there's been others, we did an amazing series about death and dying at the end of last year,
Nice.
which was really phenomenal from different perspectives. We've also just had some fun, interesting talks. So Jimmy Chu came to spend a few days with us, the ship
Mm.
designer. We had Julia Gillard, the former Prime Minister of Australia, now running
Oh,
the Wellcome Trust.
yeah.
We had the Olympic cyclist Chris Boardman, who was absolutely amazing on how to connect with people, change people's ideas, as well as just being a brilliant athlete. We've had a number of our own academics as well. And, you know, just to give you two examples, we have a very distinguished classical linguist, James Claxon, who is a real expert in old languages, has done a brilliant talk on taboo language.
Mm.
Why do we swear the way that we swear? Why are there some words which became completely taboo, like the old word for a bear, which was vanished from the language a few hundred years ago in Germany? Absolutely brilliant. Um, and then, you know, another one of our colleagues, Professor Claire Chambers, who wrote about why the state shouldn't recognize marriage. You know, and she has a completely different take on how we should think about relationships. So we do lots of these things. And I should say for anybody who's listening, almost all of our events are free and live streamed and open to anybody anywhere in the world. So please do have a look. They're also on YouTube. So if you look for Jesus College YouTube, you'll find many of these events going back for a number of years. And we have some really good ones coming up. I mean, the 8th of September, we have one of the first 100 Googlers. So Ming was one of the first 100 people at Google. He managed to get the title of Jolly Good Fellow when he was there, and he's then moved into mindfulness and well-being
Yeah.
in Buddhism. So absolutely fascinating. If that grabs your interest, maybe you should have him on the show.
Absolutely. I want to talk to you about this. I want to become a fan of this because this looks really interesting. I'm gonna be yeah, gonna be all over this, I think. So some really important topics there: responsible AI and AI healthcare, death and dying, um, and yeah, Chris Boardman, and what a real sort of smorgasbord of interesting topics. And you're also involved with the generoussociety.com. So what's that?
So that's back in my political life, and
Okay.
so as I said, I'm very much a liberal, but I think the concept of liberalism is not one that's well understood. If you look around the world, in the US, the word liberal means far left.
Hmm.
If you look in Australia, the word liberal means far right. So the Liberals in Australia are the right wing party. And people talk about neoliberal, and people don't really know what liberal means. And so there's various of us who are trying to think this. There's Alexandre Lefebvre, who's a professor at the University of Sydney, who's written about liberalism as a way of life, saying that actually the reason it's often hard to articulate a liberal vision is that we're so used to living in it that it's like fish would find it hard to talk about what water is because
Yes.
they're in it the whole time.
Yes.
And so, together with a brilliant writer, one of my former researchers, Tom King, during COVID, we decided to produce a pamphlet to say what would a liberal vision really be like if we got to do all the things we wanted to do? What would that be? What would that feel like? And so it's at generoussociety.com. Do have a look. It's not about detailed policies, it's about ideas. It's got beautiful pictures. But so we're trying to think about how could we free people up? So the strapline in some ways is how do we create a world where all of us are able to be generous with ourselves and with each other? Because at the moment, too often we are trapped by the society we're in, the world we're in, to actually being quite selfish on the one hand, in terms of
Yep.
not helping others,
Yep.
but also actually not treating ourselves all that well. The number of people who overwork, who enhance their stress, who would actually be better off if they could have an easier time. And so we set up some ideas of how could you create a society where people are liberated. So we talk about liberating people from. It's using a famous quote from the Liberal Democrat Constitution, which says that we want to free people from enslavement due to poverty, enslavement due to ignorance, and enslavement due to conformity. So how do we create a world where people are free to create and to earn, and can try new entrepreneurial ideas, do all sorts of things, but the cost of failure isn't that you don't have somewhere to live, that you can't afford food, where we can shape our surroundings, where you can move, live, and love freely, where you can be generous, but also where you can be free to learn, to grow, to specialize, to adapt, to develop skills, to get good information, hugely important. And how we can make sure that you are safe, that you're free from economic anxiety, from state or other people intruding on your life and controlling you, that you can be free to really be who you are. So what we try to do in that is to set out at least a vision for if we could do this, what would it look like? How do we free people to be the best people that they can be and to be generous, as I say, both with themselves, their family, their friends, and everyone in the world?
Excellent. I'm sort of tingling here, thinking this is the world. This is the world that I want. This is the world that we want. And yeah, I'm fascinated now how we get there.
Well, that is the challenge, and we are looking at the idea of doing a book length version of the pamphlet. And there's a number of things that actually I would update in the years since the pandemic. Um, but at least if you can say what we're trying to do, you can perhaps excite people
Hmm.
because people are excited by a vision. And actually, the important but geeky details of the policies, they matter, but they're not the bit that get people really excited.
No, but the way you presented it there, the way you've articulated it so eloquently, it feels like a movement. And I think those sorts of things can carry power when people feel engaged behind a vision like that.
Well, that's the hope, and that's what we want to try to continue to articulate. And I think it should be something which will appeal to people who don't identify currently as big L liberals. Whether, if you run a business and you just want to be free to do the business in a more creative way, like so many of the entrepreneurs I work with, you should like this. If you're working for a state, that you're actually a civil servant, you should like the freedom aspects of this. So it
Yes.
doesn't appeal to the sort of libertarian hard right, and it doesn't appeal to the ultra statists on the hard left. And that's okay by me. But it should, I think, appeal to the vast majority of people who do just want to see the world being a better place for them and for everybody else.
Yes. Well, on that note, which is a lovely note to end this first segment, we're going to go into a commercial break, and there's lots of things here that I'd love to talk about after the break. You talked about responsible AI, death and dying, more interesting topics, but also this idea of creating this world that people can feel free and they can earn and feel safe economically and live with a high level of well-being. Really fascinating, and we can also have a little chat about climate change and civil liberties. There's so much. I think we might have you back again, but we'll join you after everybody after the break, and we'll do our best in the second half. Hello, this is Chris Cooper. I'm with Dr. Julian Huppert, and we've been talking about his incredible background. And I always find it fascinating when I meet people who have done different things, and I guess I have in my own career. And it's always interesting. Julian went from this fascinating background in Australia and went into science and then into politics and then into this incredible intellectual forum. And it's funny how sometimes I think you develop this smorgasbord of different experiences, and there becomes a point in your life where what didn't seem sensible or seemed not sensible but unusual suddenly comes together into something that's quite, very well formed and makes sense. You get that.
Yeah,
You found that.
yeah,
Yeah.
no, absolutely. And I think to some extent, if you try to do the same thing as other people, it's a real challenge. So my original training was chemistry, and I realized if I just wanted to be a really good chemist in a really good chemistry department, that was hard because they were brilliant people. Whereas by doing a whole bunch of different things, you actually end up being the only person who really can combine a set of things. You can come up with ideas and experiences just because you've done this, this, and this.
Yes.
I do quite a lot in entrepreneurship. I actually set up a very small biotech company that, on the one hand, won an award, on the other hand, didn't work. And we wound it up. But the amount I learnt from that was absolutely colossal. It fed into
Yeah.
the political things I did. And I think that's the pitch I would give to any young person at the moment is try to do more than one thing. You will be much more attractive later on to employers or to doing your own thing if you're not just exactly the same as the other identikit people who studied this thing and just do that.
Definitely. Yeah. Definitely. I completely agree with that. My youngest son is just doing Duke of Edinburgh, and he's only 15. But a few weeks ago, he interviewed with me about a dozen, 13 amazing people. So he got to meet the guy from MI5, MI6, etc. with me, and he's creating an ebook at the moment. Uh, uh, and I said, do you realize, how many 15-year-olds will have an ebook? And I've got to meet these amazing folk, and you Duke of Edinburgh. He said, is that really going to help me with a job? Yes, because it's going to be something that you have on your CV that other people don't have. It creates colour. It shows you're interested in things.
And the other thing, which goes back to what you were saying, I read somewhere ages ago that when you see very successful senior people, there is a very clear narrative. They did this, then that, and that combined to do this, and then another thing. But it was never clear going forwards. It's only clear going backwards.
Yes.
And so, will your son use this to go into publishing? Will he join the spy world? Will he go to? I have no
Yeah.
idea. He doesn't know. But when he writes his autobiography when he's 60, he might
Yes.
well be able to say, that was the key moment that enabled some other thing. So, advice I give my students is always if you have an easy opportunity to try something different, go for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, his eyes lit up with his interviews with a couple of people involved with motorsport.
Aha.
That makes his interest up. During the conversation before the break, there was a number of different topic areas which we discussed, and I'm just interested. One thing actually that I hear a lot of young people, particularly in this country, talking about right now is, kind of almost an anger about the number of people, immigrants coming into the country. They're very, we have, the Reform Party that's stoking some of that up as well. But what I was thinking about with your background, but also with that beautiful reframe that you had of thinking actually, if I didn't know who I was, and it wasn't decided what would I think would be the right thing to do. I'm just interested in your view on that very complex topic.
So I'm broadly speaking pro-immigration. We have benefited immensely as a country from people coming here. If you look at people who set up businesses here, hugely disproportionately, it's people coming from elsewhere. If you look at the scientific community here, the people who are doing the research that we're building on, people coming here. If you look at people working in the NHS, people coming here, and so on. We are a country which has, for many, many centuries, had people coming here, had people leaving here. And so, in that sense, I'm really supportive. I'm absolutely aware of the concerns. There are absolutely some issues with how immigration is working in some areas. But I think actually it's a symptom, not a cause. And the symptom is that the UK is not doing economically as well as it was. And therefore, people are struggling with cost of living. They're struggling to have good schooling, good healthcare, good roads. All of those things are difficult. And as a result, people are upset, quite understandably, and trying to work out who to blame.
Yes.
And blaming others is something which humans have done for, millennia. And so what we need to do is mostly to fix the actual problem. Because I'd much rather say to people, no, it's not this idea that you can't get a doctor's appointment because of all the foreigners coming here using the NHS. The way to fix that is actually to say, but actually you did get your doctor's appointment. We've just fixed that.
Mm.
You're not struggling with the cost of living. You're not struggling to be able to get by and do things. Therefore, you don't need to work out whose fault it is because you're not struggling. And so there's a really strong set of correlations around the world. Places that are doing economically better are much more positive about migration, and places which are doing economically worse are much more concerned about migration.
Right.
Now, I am absolutely not saying that all the people who have concerns about migration are xenophobic or anything like that. That is not true, and there are issues that we need to deal with. But the best solution is actually the one that just makes people better off with the things that they really care about. I'm a pro-European. Um, it is
Okay.
pretty clear that we lost several percent of GDP
Yep.
when we decided to leave the European Union. Is the EU perfect? Absolutely not. If you know any government anywhere that's perfect, please do let me know. But we took a hit to our economy, and that makes life much harder.
Yeah.
We need to find a way to fix that. I would go for much closer connections with the European Union, a customs union, as far as we can go. Personally, if it was completely up to me with a magic wand, I would rejoin. Um, and then I think with that and other things that we're doing to promote scientific growth, I think entrepreneurship has a huge part to play in this. You lift people up, and again, you can be more generous to people in need if you are doing better. If you say to somebody who is struggling to work out how to pay the mortgage, we should help other people, it's really hard. If you
Yep.
say to people who are feeling pretty good, we should help other people, I go, yeah, great. You know, I I'm a positive person about humanity. I think humans are actually very positive people if you don't put them under huge amounts of stress.
Mm.
And at the moment, we're putting people under huge amounts of stress. Now, having said all of that, obviously, it's not the case that there are no issues with migration. I do think we need to think a bit about how we mix people together, how we make sure that we keep control of what's happening. There's absolutely questions there. I would have many more legal routes for, asylum seekers to be able to apply to come here. And then you could be actually, I think, fairly firmer on people who don't go through those routes because you have a clear route. You say to somebody, the idea that we would be doubting whether people who helped us in Afghanistan or in Iraq or people where, whether we should help them, we should make all of that easy.
Mm.
And then we can have a proper system that we're in charge of. Um, and I think we've just not done that for too long. We've been too reactive. We've bought in too much to that idea that it's people coming here who are the problem.
Yes. Thank you. That's another great reframe. Very and a very helpful thought process actually when I find myself having this conversation with young people actually just thinking that through. So now let's move on to responsible AI. What are your views? How are you feeling about AI? It feels like there is it's having a big impact. So I'm seeing it on a big impact on businesses, on industries already, on employment. What's your view?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is a massively transformational technology. There is a vast amount of hype at the moment, but there is also a vast amount of reality. And there's a wonderful quote which is attributed to all sorts of people, Arthur C. Clarke and various others, that says that we always overestimate how these things will change in the short term and underestimate how they will change in the long term.
Yeah.
And so I think AI is coming in fast. I think some of the things people think it can do won't work as well as they hope. But in 20, 30 years, it will be completely different. In healthcare, it's beginning to have some bite. But let's say you are a doctor just starting your undergraduate medical degree now. 30 years' time, you'll be, let's say turning 50. AI in 30 years will be so completely different that
Mm.
we need to rethink what the point of training in medicine as it is now is. Do you need to know all of the sort of information about diagnosis? When
Yeah.
by that point, the machines probably will be much better than almost any doctor.
Yeah.
So I think there are some really interesting questions there. Some of my concerns are about control. So I think one of the things that's the core of being a liberal is a real concern about an overconcentration of power in anyone's hands.
Yeah.
I don't want the state to have too much control. I don't want the market to have too much control. I don't want a billionaire to have too much control. I don't care. I don't want you to have too much. And the way AI is going is it is massively concentrating power. You know, when Elon Musk or Sam Altman or whoever else it might be decides to tweak their parameters, they're exerting far too much power in a way that really frightens me. And there's particular problems with AI in terms of how that accelerates. So, how do we find a way to set some parameters that don't lead to a few people dictating our futures? And then I think there's also questions about what the purpose of humanity is. There's a wonderful quote from Joanna Maciejewska, who's absolutely brilliant author, video gamer, all sorts of things. And she said, I want AI to do my laundry and dishes so that I can do art and writing, not for AI to do my art and writing so that I can do my laundry and dishes. And so I think there are some real questions about how we think about the future of the economy. How do we get AI to do the stuff we don't want to do so that we can be liberated to be the people we want to be and do the things that we want to do? I see lots of wonderful artwork behind you. How do we free people to do that? Not just say, look, this is the drudgery stuff. How do we make sure that we share the work out more equally? Because otherwise, there's a risk that we have, some large fraction of the population where our only economic use for them is watching daytime television. There's some really interesting trials around Cambridge of 4-day working weeks in companies, in the council. The council around Cambridge introduced a 4-day working week. And this was somewhat controversial. People, these were council staff paid for 5 days, working for 4. And what they found has been independently assessed by the university and others was that productivity stayed basically the same.
Yep.
And it was actually cheaper for the council because they found it much easier to recruit. They had fewer agency costs because basically they were a much more attractive place to be.
Mm.
Now, I don't know about you, Chris, but my least productive day of the week is quite a lot less productive than my most productive day of the week.
Yes. Can
And
be.
so if you can get rid of the worst bit and have a bit less illness and a bit less stress, actually you can keep your productivity pretty good.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
can we free people? Then again, it comes back to this idea, some of which is the generous society. Can we use AI to help people be more productive so they work less and are then free to try entrepreneurial ideas, paint, care for their family, see friends, enjoy nature, whatever it is that you want to do? Because most of us don't really want to stare at screens typing.
No. That's very interesting. And what I'm about to say might be slightly controversial, but my I was asking my wife the other day about so she's a medic, GP, and GP trainer, um, and facilitator, and she I asked her what she felt about the about the striking of young doctors and around salaries and how their salaries have been eroded over time, and she made a really interesting point. She said the thing is. For my mind, when I was training as a GP 25, 30 years ago, I was working 100-hour shifts. They're now working 38 hours. And so proportionally, we might have earned a bit more, but the conditions are better, and I thought, hadn't thought about that before.
There's a whole set of questions in healthcare about I mean, frankly, all of these areas. And one of the issues is also about status. And for many, what used to be called junior doctor, I think now resident doctors, it's some of the problems are also just things like the training system where they can be sent anywhere, the
Yes.
lack of control over their lives. That makes a
Yeah.
big difference.
Huge.
There's some wonderful research my mother always used to talk about, which shows that your self-reported well-being, how happy you feel in your life, does increase with your money, with your income, but only a bit. So the big change is at very low levels. If you go from earning 5,000 a year to 10,000 a year to 20,000 a year, very big difference. Above that, it levels off. And things like, do you have friends? Do you have activities you enjoy? They start to become more important.
Yep. Agreed.
And giving, if you have, I don't know, 200,000 a year, getting an extra 10,000 a year, yeah, great. I love it. But actually, is that the driver? And so I think we do need to think about status. I think there are issues with professions such as medicine and many others of people feeling a bit more nervous about their role.
Yep.
The day where people looked up to doctors as these sort of, not quite gods, but getting there.
They're the biggest house in the village, and usually,
That has
well,
changed.
yeah,
The GP was the respected person in the village.
yeah,
I'm sure your wife is the respected person in the village, other than you, obviously. But it has changed. The introduction of physician associates made people feel I think a bit threatened.
mm,
There's also big issues within healthcare about what the point is. So the NHS and most doctors are about treating people who are sick. That's great. I'm in favour of that, but I'm much more in favour of all of the stuff that comes before that.
yes, yes.
Prevention and actually things like social determinants of health. So Michael Marmot, who is the world expert on this, and as it happens, is my uncle,
Oh
will say
wow,
that actually some of the main areas are about housing, about economic inequality. That the reason we have sick people, a large part of that is nothing to do with healthcare at all. It's way down the line. And so the fire brigade are amazing people. They will risk their lives to drag you out of a burning building. But they will see that as a failure to prevent the fire. And they will spend most of their time trying to prevent fires from happening. So success isn't we rescued 20% more people from fires this year. Its success is actually we had several days we didn't have to do anything because there were no fires. We've managed to get the number of fires down.
yes,
And
yes,
again, reframing successful healthcare is actually when you have doctors twiddling their thumbs because people are healthy.
yeah,
Where you don't have, it's not that you treated cancer, so you didn't have a cancer to treat.
yes.
And if we focus only on treatment, it will always be more expensive. We will never have enough money, and then you will have to work out how to split the money.
So I had a wonderful guest on a year or two ago who's an absolute expert in cancer treatment in the US. She got the biggest tissue bank in the world, I think, that she'd amassed, and she was just so frustrated because she was all for being able to detect cancer at such a very early phase, and I got all these tissue samples and things because she wanted them research to be able to spot the signals and the traces, and learn how to do that. But actually, the whole mechanism around in America around private medicine means they generate their money when people are really sick.
But it's also here that, a number of years ago, there was a primary care trust in the north of England that paid money to grit pavements and were told off for wasting healthcare money. They said, but it's cheaper for us to grit the
Yeah,
pavement than to
yeah.
patch up the broken legs. You know, but people don't thank them for that.
Oh,
You don't sort of not fall over the pavement and think, fantastic, I avoided hospital. So again, how do we reframe this? Not to focus on the doing of making people not as ill, but being less, but being healthy to start with.
Yeah.
So my mother was all about positive psychology. What is it that makes you happy with your life? Not what is it that makes you unhappy with your life? What are the good things? Let's try and work out what gives people more of those.
This has been an amazing conversation, and I've got so much more I'd like to put your way. But I've noticed we've got 3 minutes left until
Oh
until the
gosh,
end of the
okay.
interview. It's been absolutely brilliant, and I've some really helpful reframes in there, and ways to think about issues and methodologies. So be lovely to talk to you again about some of these other issues that you are working on at the Intellectual Forum and Generous Society. I wonder if you've got like a final message that you might like to leave us with. Any?
I think there's a number of things I think it could be, but I do think, to go back to the philosopher Rawls. I mean, his writing is rather complex, but the idea is great. What would I like the world to be if I didn't know I was me?
Yes.
If because it's so easy to accidentally argue for whoever you are. But what if I didn't know? Who would I want? What would I want the system to be like? And how can I edge things towards that?
Yes.
And that does mean, you'll have listeners who are passionate about business. Brilliant. How do we create conditions where the people who want to do that can do that, are rewarded to do that, encouraged to do that? How do we make that happen? Doesn't have to conflict on anybody else. I did a big piece of work. We created a charter for entrepreneurs based on talking to tech entrepreneurs around Cambridge. And what they wanted was completely different from what the right-wing politicians were asking for. They wanted the freedom to make it more likely that their business would succeed, not for them to always get more money if it does succeed.
Yeah.
Success has value, and I'd rather be twice as likely to succeed and make a good chunk of money than less likely to succeed but get more if I do. So I think we can actually elevate pretty much everybody.
Yes.
And so I think that's a thread that people are going to have. What do I want, and how do I fit that with what somebody else wants?
Yeah, Dr. Julian Huppert, it's been fabulous talking to you today. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I know our listeners will have enjoyed this conversation immensely as well. We'll make sure we share it widely. So if you want to find out more about Julian's work, go to check out the intellectualforum.org, also generoussociety.com. On chriscooper.co.uk, also put a blog, a post, and we'll put various different links and videos and things like that on as well, and we'll share that on social media. So yeah, do check that out. And on next week's show, we have Duo Oi, and we're going to talk about from the streets to finding your feet, about empowering the next generation. He has an organization called 2020 Levels. It's a multi-award winning organization that helps Black and also disadvantaged young people to find their feet and get on in life. And they've helped thousands upon thousands of people to do that. They have all sorts of coaching, mentoring programs, and so we're going to find out about his journey and about this story next week. But once again, a big thank you to Dr. Julian Huppert. And if you've got any questions or comments, get in touch with me at chris@chriscooper.co.uk. Do check out what we're doing at chriscooper.co.uk. And yeah, and think about some of these things, and think about actually when you're sharing your opinion on something, have you really thought about it from the perspective of what would I like the world to be if I didn't know it was me?